Hey guys, what is going on? Chris here, as always, with Shughead Gaming, bringing you my review for Downward Spiral Horus Station, developed by Third Eye Studios and released September 19th on Oculus, Vive, PS4, and PSVR. This review, of course, is based on the PSVR version, which can be purchased for an estimated retail price of $20. Of course, that depends on your region. Downward Spiral Horus Station is a mysterious and atmospheric zero-gravity thriller set in the lost and forgotten Horus Station. Coming off as a more grounded version of Detached with handguns, does this game deliver? Let's find out. As always, guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button. And if you want to see more PSVR content from me, you know the deal. Please consider subscribing, and for updates, hit that bell icon. As always, graphics are up first. The visuals in Downward Spiral aim for the realistic side of things, with inspiration obviously coming from sci-fi film classics like 2001 and Alien. Hallways, maintenance tubes, control rooms, and storage bays all feel and look incredible, with the exception of some irritating anti-aliasing issues. While the game is being stated as being pro-enhanced, I'm wondering if this may just be for the flat version, as the jagged nature of the visuals leads me to believe I am not seeing a pro-enhanced version. Regardless, when in motion or up close to objects, this is rarely an issue, but it does affect the overall polished nature of the game. The nature of the game is ambiance, and that of the desolation felt roaming this vacant space station alone. This is amplified by excellent use of lighting and shadow effects, and is especially noticeable when using your headlamp in dark spaces. Weapon models are fantastic and feel grounded in real life, and your character arms are some of the best animated arms I've seen in VR, with the usual janky and weird limb movements from most games being absent here. This is particularly noticeable as you will spend much of the game grabbing and pushing off of objects in zero-G. And speaking of zero-G movement through this weightless environment is smooth, fluid, and with fairly decent hit detection, it allows you to grab, push, and pull off of all aspects of the environment with ease. While Downward Spiral looks fairly good across the board, it is hindered by the repetitive nature and blandness of it all. While it makes sense that a space station would have many repetitive sections, here it comes across as a copy and paste cost-cutting affair. It isn't just the hallway textures, it's entire rooms and sections of the space station. This repetition gives a real sense of deja vu over the course of the 8 chapters, with players seeing just about everything the game visually has to offer before the halfway point. What's here is done well, and in some cases, like the excellent spacewalk sections, really well done. But the game feels visually padded, and I found myself often wanting something new, something more. Unfortunately, this is a feeling that crept into some other aspects of the game, but more on that later. And that brings us to sound. Ever caught yourself watching your favorite sci-fi movie or show and notice the hum of the ship? Sometimes pulsing, other times just a hulking roar off in the distance. This ambient sound sets the stage for proper sci-fi audio as it grounds everything else in a sense of reality. Downward Spiral nails this aspect and then some. For a game being built around being alone on a space station, it is the quiet moments that make up a huge part of the game, so I was very pleased to hear the developers spend time on this aspect of the sound mix. Horus Station seems to almost emanate sound as you glide through its corridors in solitude, before suddenly erupting with tense music and the sounds of enemy robots approaching. Combat is made even more tense with the excellent sound work done on the various weapons you will arm yourself with. Weapons are loud and distinctive, thankfully erring more on the side of Alien's weapon realism and less Star Wars laser blasts. And speaking of music, the electronic ambient soundtrack in Downward Spiral is composed by hymn frontman Ville Valo, giving the game a music quality not expected in smaller releases such as this. I would have preferred a more epic symphonic soundtrack more fitting with the movies the game emulates, but that is simply a preference and not a knock against the excellent work done here. Finally, the sound package is delivered in a nicely done 3D sound mix, which ensures the great sound work done here is presented to its full extent. Next up is gameplay. Released only a few months back, the fantastic Detached showed VR headsets that floating in zero-G was a sensation that only VR could do justice to. While not as extreme as Detached, Downward Spiral Horus Station proves again that VR and floating in space is awesome and a lot of fun. With a game that basically skimps on story, much of this game is based around its movement system, so thankfully, it's fantastic. The 2D version of the game has you using a DS4 controller, and much of the game is a tired and bland affair. But when brought into VR and armed with 2 move controllers as your hands, things take on a much different feel, and as a result, makes for a significantly more exhilarating game experience. Like astronauts in current times, you will grab a hold and push or pull yourself through corridors, gliding endlessly until you hit something or recorrect. This type of movement will stay with you the whole game, but will be significantly upgraded with the assistance of a grappling gun and a thruster tool. For those who found Detached to be too much with its head-over-head free movement, fear not with Downward Spiral, for the game keeps you fixed in the world so as up stays up and down stays down. This still allows for some awesome flight abilities, but without the stomach churning of Detached. While Detached remains my zero-G movement of choice, it's not for everyone, and here Downward Spiral presents a movement scheme more in line with what you've seen in the movies. Downward Spiral is primarily an exploration game, as you will go from section to section bringing systems back online. There's no dialogue or cutscenes to be had, so the plot and reason for your mission must be pieced together and interpreted. While I enjoy this vagueness in some games, what's here is so sparse and vague that there's practically no plot whatsoever. What you are left with is 4 hours of flying down corridors and opening hatches, then finding keycards to open more hatches and more corridors. Rinse and repeat. Breaking up this monotony is the robot inhabitants that don't seem to like you very much. These combat situations are actually pretty fun, as you can defend yourself with a selection of weaponry that includes bolt throwers, railguns, and a modified arc welder. The enemy variety could be more varied, but what's here will keep you on your toes with sheer numbers, cloaking devices, and the odd boss-type fight. For those who prefer to just explore, combat is optional, and an explore-only campaign option can be chosen from the main menu. However, whichever mode you decide to go with, the game still suffers from being over-padded, with simply not enough story, combat, or new station areas to sustain its 4-hour campaign. This bloated campaign makes for a bad case of deja vu, and ultimately boredom sets in. What I'm saying is the excellent movement, gameplay, and fun combat just isn't enough, and I found myself wondering when the game would end around the halfway point. Released originally on PSVR as a 30-minute prologue, the full game unfortunately feels like that same 30 minutes just copied and pasted for length. The campaign can be played solo or co-op with a friend, but for those looking for something to do outside of the main campaign, you'll also find 8-player PvP and Horde mode across a multitude of maps from the main game. Unfortunately, the online portion comes off as an afterthought and a missed opportunity, and while some fun can be had here, it ultimately lacks any depth outside of the cool factor of flying around in zero-G with your friends, and to top it off, matchmaking is done poorly and is severely lacking any lobby options. Gameplay aside, the tracking in Downward Spiral is fantastic, and using the required 2 move controllers is fantastic. One issue though that exists is that the game requires you to use a DS4 to turn on the VR mode. But even though you switch to move controllers, the DS4 is required to stay on. Ultimately, what ends up happening is eventually your unused DS4 shuts down and your game pauses, and you must deal with the hassle of getting it back on, or just simply remember to move it every 10 minutes or so. Hopefully this oversight is patched shortly, as it's very irritating. The more stable nature of the movement and the slower pace should limit motion sickness, but there are comfort options available, and one that can't be turned off, and that is the click turning. Oh my god, when will developers and Sony realize most of us not only hate this, but it ruins the experience? Here, this is less of an issue than other games when you're on foot, but it is still a glaring omission and does hinder the experience for those of us who prefer full immersion. Finally, a moderate amount of space is required for this. You will be sitting down, but you will be reaching up and down and around to fling yourself forward and open hatches. And that brings us to fun factor in my final review. Downward Spiral Horus Station is a very fun but highly repetitive affair. It simply lacks enough ideas to justify its campaign length, and the multiplayer is dead. It is a game built around a movement system, but is that enough? As you know, I hate rating scales and instead review games on a basis of buy, wait for a sale, or burn it to the ground. I really enjoyed Downward Spiral, at least for a while. I think it's a brilliant experience in VR, but does unfortunately overstay its welcome. For me, this is a buy, but I think many will prefer to wait for a sale. I loved the movement and the combat, what there was of it, and it was fun. I guess you'll have to decide what that's worth to you, and with so many amazing games after our VR dollars, that is a tough call. Anyways, guys, that's it for me, and remember, if you like this video, please hit that like button, and if you want to see more PSVR content from me, please consider subscribing, and for updates, you know the deal, hit that bell icon. I will catch you guys on my next video.